Let's face it, people can be disappointing, to say the least. They can be insensitive. They can be downright cruel and nasty. In fact, some humans are more terrifying than any animal that you'd ever encounter out in the wild. How about you? Have you been let down by people that should have lifted you up? Have you been marginalized or maybe even oppressed? Are you stuck in the trauma from long ago? Having trouble breaking free from past hurts? Well, today, I want to free you. We're going to discuss the truth about victimization and how to get freedom from your past. We're going to unpack those lies that are keeping you stuck, and I'm going to tell you how to take back your power and experience freedom. Let's get unhindered. I don't know about you, but I've been wronged a few times in my life. I've been a legit victim, like for real. I'm sure you've heard people accuse other people, or maybe even accuse you of playing the victim. But victimization is a real thing. Some people really are victims. What about you? Are you a real victim? Well, what is a victim? The dictionary says that it is someone who has been harmed, injured, or killed. Wow, that seems like a pretty narrow definition. So I looked up what is harmed, and it said it's technically only physical. It's only physical injury that counts as harm. So, what about the victim of identity theft or the victim of a cheating spouse? I mean, they're not being physically harmed, but I would say that they're still a victim. People can suck. They can really suck. I'm a counselor, that's my occupation. And so I hear a lot of sad stories. And I can tell you one thing is true from my experience: people hurt people all the time. So if you feel like a victim, then maybe you truly have been victimized. I mean, has someone stolen from you, cheated on you, beaten you, raped you, molested you? If you've been sinned against, you've been victimized. Has someone referred to your biological sex when you really wanted them to refer to your desired gender? Has someone said something that was really offensive to your race? Has someone required you to do something that you didn't like doing, or be around somebody that you didn't want to be around, or maybe somebody spoke truth to you and it was really painful and it made you cry, it really hurt your feelings? I think our definition of victim has really expanded in recent years, and maybe a little too much, especially as a counselor. When I hear people's real trauma, and then I hear other people saying, "Oh, I'm a victim," or "I'm traumatized by something that in the scheme of life is much smaller than what I'm used to hearing," it bothers me. I think that we are too quick to use the word trauma and the word victim. It's used flippantly. Check this out as an example of one of those such people.
What do you have to say to the trans students on this campus who feel actively victimized by your presence here?
Life's tough. Get a helmet, man. I'm too pregnant for this.
Yeah, it seems everyone is a victim these days. So, before we talk about how to move past, how to move beyond the past, I think it's important that we take just a moment to look at the difference between what I'd call real victims and fake victims. How about these people? Do you think they're victims?
I want to make it clear that the compliment, "I had no idea you were trans," is rooted in transphobia. Yeah. Just ask yourself, why is this person's transness something they should be happy that I didn't perceive? And it sucks because, like, for a lot of us, even if we've unpacked all this stuff, like, it still feels good to hear. But I think collectively we need to find better compliments and unpack the ones we give to trans people as non-trans people.
Okay, so let me get this straight. If you try to give someone a compliment, but they don't like that compliment, and because it's not what they wanted to hear, then you've done something wrong and you are victimizing them. Hmm.
Think about a a time when someone said something about some aspect of your identity that made you feel insulted or slighted, even if they didn't intend it? You probably experienced a microaggression.
A microaggression is something that someone says to someone else without knowing that it may be offensive. It hurts. So that's how I know it's a microaggression.
Most microaggressions are subtle and indirect, but they occur frequently in the daily interactions of members of historically underrepresented groups. And most often, people who commit microaggressions think of themselves as well-intentioned, non-racist, non-sexist people. They do not realize that the underlying messages communicated by their actions or comments are hurtful to other people.
Okay, so if you say something that is offensive to someone, even if you didn't mean to offend them and you had no way of knowing that that was offensive, you are still doing something wrong and you still should have known better. And you should definitely never unknowingly say something that would hurt somebody in the future.
In the 3-second intro I did, I was like, "Hey everybody, it's your girl Frost, what's up?" or something like that. And within a couple minutes of uploading, I was just swarmed with a bunch of hateful, hurtful, transphobic comments. Most of them were along the lines of, "That's a man," or "You're not a girl." One guy took it a bit further than the others and was just like, "I'm embarrassed for your bloodline. You're not a girl."
Okay, so I got it. So if you see someone who very obviously is a man, but they don't want to be a man, and you call them a man, that is really wrong. And you are victimizing them. Wow. I'm thinking that maybe we should just stop talking because we just can't seem to get it right. We are victimizing people all over the place, left and right. I think it's getting to the point where we just probably should just stop talking. People say they're being attacked when someone speaks truth, even if they have no intent to harm them with that truth. Or if somebody says something that's offensive, they're like, "Oh, you're attacking me." They call it microaggressions and hate speech. Another example of this is cultural appropriation. The Britannica definition of cultural appropriation is when a majority group adopts cultural elements of a minority group in a negative, exploitative, disrespectful, stereotypical way. Solomon Linda, he was a South African musician in the 1930s or 40s, kind of a local star, because he wrote this song called it Mbooby, and he got some level of fame there where he was for his song. But under the apartheid system, things became tough and he was struggling financially. And he decided that one way that he could help himself would be to sell the rights to his song. He could make some money from that. So he sold it for 10 shillings, which in today's money is like 40 some US dollars. And someone bought it. They revamped it. They made some changes to it. And eventually it got sold to Disney down the line. It goes a little something like this. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. I hope I don't get copyright infringement for singing it. That's why I didn't play it for you. You had to bear with my singing instead. But we all recognize that, right? The song from The Lion King. Solomon Linda wrote that, and it was originally called Mbooby. If you listen to his original version, it's quite a bit different, but you would know that it's the same song. It's similar enough that you would be able to tell that it's the same song. I listened to it. I thought it was pretty neat because I didn't know the history of this song. But this is often used as an example of cultural appropriation. People say that Linda was the victim, a victim of a white man specifically, because I guess white people bought the song and revamped it and eventually sold it to Disney. And so poor Solomon Linda is the victim of the white man because of this. And it's used as a good example of cultural appropriation. And I'm just like, but is it? So the way I see this, let's say that I painted a painting and it was good. Now, this would never happen, but let's say it happened. And it was so good that I could sell it for $200. And I was like, wow, I painted something and I sold it for $200. And I think that I got a good deal. The person that buys it ends up like putting a really nice frame on it, Maybe they add a couple strokes, paint strokes here and there, make it look a little better, and they have some good connections, and they end up selling my painting for $200,000. Would I feel like they had done something wrong to me? No, I might be like, dang, wish I could have made $200,000 from it, but I sold it. I sold it. It's not mine anymore. It's theirs. They can do whatever they want with it. Good on them if they're able to take that and invest in it and turn it into something more. And that's the way I see the situation with Solomon Linda. He chose to sell it. He chose to. He sold the rights away. It's not his anymore. And he chose the price that he would sell it for. So I'm not really sure that there's any exploitative, disrespectful, or stereotypical way that that was adopted, right? Because that's the definition of cultural appropriation, that it's done in an exploitative, disrespectful, or stereotypical way. And I don't see that in that story, even though that's given as like a prime example. So what I want to know is, where does cultural appropriation stop? Where's the line? Like, can I eat Mexican food? Can I listen to rap music? Can I wear a kilt? Or do I have to stick to white American female stereotypical things? Like, I have to be stuck in some type of cultural box that I'm put in as a white American female. Like, I don't understand how men are wearing dresses today and we're told that they're not appropriating women. But if I were to wear a sombrero, I would be told that I am appropriating Mexicans. I had a sombrero as a kid and I thought it was the coolest thing. And it had nothing to do with cultural appropriation. It had everything to do with just thinking it's cool. So you cannot assume that your perception is reality and play out that truth and live as a victim. Every little thing cannot make you a victim. You're not a victim if you're taking a nap in the middle of the day and your phone rings and wakes you up. You're not a victim if you are trying to concentrate and a motorcycle drives by loudly. You're not a victim if there's no parking spot for you, or there's no gluten-free bread for you at communion, or there's, I could go on. I could think of a million examples, like your period comes a day early, or you can't fit in the airplane seat. You are not a victim in those situations. I mean, where does it end? Really, we have to draw a line somewhere. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Our entire culture seems to be built around this idea of victimization. Our government is enacting policies that forward this way of thinking, promote this way of thinking, that revolve around victimhood. But I'll get into more of that in a future episode, I'm sure. I have one more example for you before we move on of a possible victim. So Sheets, you know, the major gas station. I don't know where you're located if you have them, but right now where I live, Sheets are being built on every corner. Very big, popular gas station. And they were sued by the federal government recently. What was their crime? Their crime was not hiring people who failed a criminal background check. Their crime was not wanting to hire criminals. All that mattered, the government said, was that their policy of not hiring people who fail a criminal background check was disproportionately affecting members of a certain racial group. And therefore, it was not okay. Check this out.
This week, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission filed a lawsuit against the Sheetz convenience store chain. Officials claim the chain violated civil rights law by sorting out job applicants who failed a criminal background check, resulting in alleged discrimination against minority applicants. Sheetz operates more than 700 stores across 6 states, including North Carolina. In a statement, the company says it, quote, does not tolerate discrimination of any kind.
So this all came to light when a couple of people who were denied employment there filed complaints with the EEOC, and then the Biden administration backed them up and said, like, this is wrong because it's disproportionately affecting this group. They weren't not hired because of their race. They are not victims. They failed the criminal background check, meaning they actually had a criminal record, and Sheetz doesn't want to hire criminals, and they have the right to not hire criminals. It seems today, in our current environment in America, that being seen as a victim is actually a good thing, and being seen as privilege is considered bad. People are put into one of 3 categories. You are either oppressed, or you are an oppressor, or You are the hero of the oppressed. You're rushing in to be their ally and stick up for them and defend their cause. Stop putting people in these categories. It's not helpful. It's just dividing us. And if you've heard of intersectionality, it's a concept that says that the more marginalized categories you are in, the bigger victim you are, and therefore the more we should listen to you and build things around you. So if you're Black and you're female and you're gay, then you're the bigger victim because you're in 3 categories. And so you have more truth, personal truth, than somebody who doesn't have as many victim categories. And you should be running things and you should be making rules because you understand things better than the rest of us. I assert that being the bigger victim is not a virtue. This is not who you want to be. Why is everybody fighting to see who's the bigger victim? How's it benefiting them? Is it like they get more attention? They get handouts? There's low expectations, like, oh, well, you're a really big victim, so we don't have to expect much from you. Or it's just a way to justify their poor behavior. Well, that's because I'm a victim of this, this, and that. That's why I act this way. Do you really want to be seen that way? Do you really want to be seen as fragile and needy? Our culture today makes us change names and logos, trying to make sure we don't offend anyone or victimize anyone. And like I said, it's positioning everybody as either the oppressor, the oppressed, or the hero. And even like marketing reinforces this kind of thinking. I've read a lot of marketing books because I'm very entrepreneurial. And oftentimes I'll read it says, make sure when you're trying to sell somebody a product or a service that you tell them it's not their fault that they need this product or service. That makes them more likely to buy it, because people like to feel like they don't need help. I don't need help. I can fix this myself. But if you say, but it's not your fault that you're in the situation where you need this help. And so it's okay to buy my product or service. It's not your fault that you're unhealthy and obese. It's the fault of the FDA or whatever. It's the food's fault. And therefore, you need this wonder drug that I'm going to sell you that's going to make you lose weight. And you don't have to feel bad about buying it. That's what these marketing books teach. If you look around, victimhood is reinforced everywhere. You may even have friends that they don't want to tell you the truth. They're afraid to tell you. People are afraid to tell people the truth. And so they tell you what you want to hear. Let me be your friend today. And let me say, stop being a victim. You are in a prison of your own making. You're in a prison cell that has no bars. And you're just sitting there. You can get out. You don't have to be in there. Someone close to me who is an alcoholic once told me, he said, I drink because I'm lonely. And I said, no, you're lonely because you drink. Because this person, I've known him for a long time, and he used to have a lot of friends. He was the life of the party, traveling the country, very socially influential, until alcohol got the best of him, along with drugs. And now he's lonely because one by one, people left his life. And he uses his loneliness as an excuse to keep drinking. He's keeping himself in a cell with no bars on it. I used to have a friend who spent her days and nights complaining about how other people were failing her. They're falling short. Everybody just always disappoints her. They just aren't there for her the way that she needs them to be there for her. She's always pointing out what's wrong with everybody else instead of looking at herself. Meanwhile, her family relationships were falling apart. Her husband was leaving her. Her kids were being diagnosed with mental disorders. Her best friend was distancing herself from her. She didn't have a job and still couldn't even keep up with the basic daily functioning of life, complaining because she's doing dishes at midnight because she just couldn't get to it all day because everybody's not being there for her the way that she needs them to be there for her. She was always the victim and she was never wrong. And I just wanted to say, take the log out of your own eye so that you can see to remove the speck from other people's eyes. What about you? What about you? Are you a real victim or a fake victim? I think that it was important for us to kind of go through that first, because next I'm going to tell you how to stop, how to get out of it, how to get free from the past. But I think it's really good to analyze this idea of victimhood and how it's so flippantly used today. So the truth is, I don't care really if you're a real victim or a fake victim. Like, it's a continuum, right? On one end, there are people who think that they are a victim because there was someone in the room that they didn't want to be in the room, or someone spoke truth and they don't like truth. And then there's all the way at the other end where people have had absolutely atrocious sins committed against them, and everything in between. But either way, you gotta break free, right? No matter what, you gotta move beyond it. We gotta get past it. The first thing I would say is that if you're refusing to overcome, to rise above what's happened to you because the person who hurt you hasn't acknowledged what they've done to you, they haven't apologized, they haven't made up for it in any way, and you're like, no, they don't get it. They still don't understand what they did to me. They won't acknowledge it. And therefore, how am I ever supposed to move past this? How could I possibly move on? So in other words, you're not forgiving, and you find yourself always telling everyone else the story of what this other person has done to you, and you ruminate on it a lot. That means you're stuck. You're stuck. You're also stuck if you find yourself always having these really high expectations for others that they never seem to meet because they can't read your mind, and you're just constantly disappointed by people. Then you're stuck in victim mentality. If you think that you are owed something, and you use that as an excuse to stay stuck, or maybe even as an excuse to try to get revenge or act the way that you act. Like, well, I only do this because da 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 da, this happened and that happened, and nothing has happened. I haven't gotten this and I haven't gotten that back, and I'm owed this. You're stuck in victim mentality. And lastly, I'd say if you have learned helplessness, you're stuck. And what I mean by learned helplessness is that you've learned to be helpless. This is people who are like, well, nothing I can do. This is just the way my life has been. These are just the cards I was dealt. I try this, it doesn't work. I try that, nothing happens. There's just nothing I can do. They have a very external locus of control, meaning they think that life happens to them, and they're not empowered to say, no, I can take charge. And although I'm not in complete control of my life, there are things that I can do to make things better, and not just stay stuck in this victim mentality. So victim mentality is just one big pity party that you either consciously or subconsciously use to your advantage, and it can become part of your identity. There's actually people who have what's called a tendency for interpersonal victimhood, TIV, tendency for interpersonal victimhood. It's a psychological term, and it's defined as an ongoing feeling that the self is a victim, and it's generalized across all kinds of relationships. So people who have a higher tendency for this interpersonal victimhood, they feel victimized more often, more intensely, and for longer durations in their interpersonal relations than those who would have a lower tendency for this. So in essence, this means if you have a high tendency for this, you're going to feel like a victim more often and across various relationships. And we typically see this with people who have 4 characteristics. They have a high need for recognition. They feel morally elite or morally superior to others often. They lack empathy, and they struggle with rumination, with like being stuck in thoughts, like just the same thought going around and around in their mind all the time, and they can't stop thinking about it. So if you possess those 4 traits, high need for recognition, moral elitism, lack of empathy, and rumination, then you're going to feel like a victim more often. And someone stuck in victim mentality, basically they're letting the past control their life. They're letting the past control their future. And in some way, they're using it, whether they know it or not, they're using it to benefit themselves. But the good news is that even real victims, people who have had horrible, horrible things done to them, they don't have to remain victims. They don't have to stay stuck. They can thrive. That's what we're going to talk about today as we get into the meat of this. One of my favorite examples, one of the biggest inspirations for this, is Dr. Phil himself. Check this out.
Well, we moved around a lot. I moved every 3 years because my dad was an alcoholic.
What did you think it was when you were 5, 6, or 7? You literally were like, this is because of that thing?
Yeah, I thought he was a drunk, yeah. I went in and out the window so I didn't have to go through the house because it was total chaos.
Like what type of chaos?
Well, yelling, screaming, violence.
And where was your mom during this?
She was pretty passive. She was there, but pretty passive.
Okay.
So Dr. Phil grew up in a violent and chaotic home. I read that he moved to a new state like every 3 years of his childhood. His dad was an alcoholic. He would come in and out of his bedroom window just to like not have to walk through his home because it was so chaotic. He was homeless for a few years in high school, so he didn't have the greatest start. He was not privileged by any means. And yet, look what he has been able to do with his life, despite all of that. Another great example is Tyler Perry. Check this out.
Yeah, there was a lot of I was the object of my father's disaffection. There was a lot of abuse there, but I'm on the other side of it now and celebrating it. But it's been a journey getting here. When I said that I was celebrating the abuse, is what I mean is I found out in life that everything that happens to you can work for your good if you let it, no matter how bad, no matter how traumatic. For me, my turnaround came when I forgave my father for everything that he did, and I realized after doing that everything that had happened had brought me to this position where I am now.
So Tyler Perry was born and raised in New Orleans, and his childhood was one of poverty and abuse, abuse at the hands of a man who he later learned was not actually his biological father. Perry actually attempted suicide. He dropped out of high school, and through all of this, he kept a journal, which he ended up turning into his first play. In a Forbes article, I read that he spent his 20s touring small theaters around the country, performing the plays that he wrote. He wrote them, he produced them, and he starred in them. And he is quoted as saying, "You got to understand, I had no mentors. My father doesn't know anything about business. My uncles, my mothers, they know nothing about this. I didn't go to business school. Everything I learned in progress." I love that. He began writing scripts while he was selling cars and while he was a bill collector. And he eventually cobbled together $12,000, and he used that money to rent out a space in a community theater in Atlanta to produce a work that he had been drafting in his spare time. And he has a play called I Know I've Been Changed, which is a story of a child abuse survivors. And it was hardly an overnight success, but at one point it was generating enough money for him to be able to pay his rent. So he was making it. And for 3 months, he lived out of his car off and on, and he kept tweaking the production and working out the kinks until he started to garner some notice. It started to get somewhere. He designed the set, he made the programs, he hung the lights, and he even sold snacks during intermission. So he was a one-man show. He did so much on his own, very determined to make it, despite he wasn't using his past as an excuse. And as you probably know, he was eventually noticed by Oprah, who catapulted his career. I think Perry's grit enabled him to push past his scarred childhood and end up becoming the mastermind behind 24 feature films, 20 stage plays, and 17 TV shows, and 2 best-selling books. And that was just all at my last count. There may be more since then. One of my favorite quotes that I've heard from him is this: "My biggest success is getting over the things that have tried to destroy and take me out of this life. Those are my biggest successes. It has nothing to do with work." And then there's me. I told you, I've been a victim. I was raised by a teenage mom, grew up not in poverty, but fairly poor. Like, we struggled. Had alcoholism and drugs and abuse in my childhood home. I grew up in a cult. I was pregnant at 16, had a baby at 17, fled an abusive marriage at the age of 19. I went to college, 11 years of college, got my bachelor's in psychology, my master's in counseling. While I was doing that, I got remarried and had 2 more kids, and was just like pushing and striving to get to the life that I wanted. And just as soon as I thought I had gotten there, I was taken out by a debilitating autoimmune disorder. I was essentially bedridden for 6 months. I could like stand up for 15, 20 seconds at a time so I could like get to the toilet and get back. And that was pretty much it. I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't cook meals. If we had to go somewhere, my husband had to push me around in a wheelchair. And I fought and struggled my way out of that. I got to the bottom of those issues. I got myself healthier than I'd ever been in my life. I weaned myself off the medications they had put me on. I've been knocked down many, many times, but I keep getting back up. And I don't say any of that to make myself look special. Quite the opposite. I say it because I'm not special. And if I can do it, if I can push my way out of it, I know you can. So I would say to get in the driver's seat of your life. That's what it sounds like I'm saying, right? But I would actually say that I want you to get in the passenger seat of your life. If you have Jesus taking the wheel in the driver's seat, because he's way better at driving your life than you will ever be. If you are trusting him to guide you, and if you are following his example of forgiveness, forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. And if you're following his example of humility, dying on the cross, laying down his life for his friends, then stay in the passenger seat and just let him take you for a ride, because he will take you for the ride of your life, a good one. So let's see first what the Bible has to say about getting free from the past. And then I'm going to tell you what I think the ultimate cure for victimhood is. Ephesians 4:32. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Colossians 3:13. Bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Matthew 18:21 and 22. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Wow. Once you forgive, you need to then humble yourself, because focusing on you and your pain makes your pain seem so big and makes you think that the world is all about what you're going through. I love to go places like the Grand Canyon or somewhere like that, Yellowstone, and just realize how small I am and how small my problems are in the big scheme of things. But if you're focusing on yourself all the time, that's really going to push you more towards victimhood. So instead, you need to choose to be humble and value others above yourself. Forgiving those who have hurt you in the past is one of the keys to breaking free. And forgiveness is rooted in remembering what Jesus has done for you, how he has forgiven you. And you didn't deserve it. And the person you're forgiving probably doesn't deserve it either. But what right do you have when you've been forgiven so much to tell somebody else that you wouldn't forgive them? Who are you to keep that from them? Philippians 2:3 and 4. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Proverbs 11:2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. Matthew 23:12. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. So humility is a key. Like I said earlier, taking the log out of your own eye so that you can even see to remove the speck in somebody else's. That takes us right back to humility. And then Romans 8:28, my absolute favorite verse, says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So no matter what has happened in your past, God can use it. He can redeem it. He can make good from it. If you are called according to his purpose, he will take all of that and make good out of it. I love that. Psalm 62:5 tells us, for God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is in him. Hebrews 11:6, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So embrace hope and faith for the future. Don't get stuck back in the past, and don't be trapped in the pessimism and the short-sightedness of focusing on the here and now. But think about the hope and faith of the future. Look forward. Have a forward-thinking mindset, because when you place your hope and your worth and your faith in Christ rather than in others, you're going to become way less worried about what other people think, and you're going to be much more focused on where God is leading you. Very important to have a future mindset. And also stop expecting perfection. Expect trouble. The Bible tells us that in this world you will have trouble. Because he overcame, and because he lives in us, we can overcome that trouble too. John 16:33 says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. 2 Corinthians 4:8 and 9. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. James 1, 2, and 3. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So turning to the Bible is the cure for victim mentality. The cure for breaking free from your past once and for all is forgiveness, humility, hope, and faith. You should aspire to those, not to being the biggest victim that you can be. Forgive, humble yourself, look forward to the future with hope and an expectancy of good things. And it will become impossible for you to be stuck in the past.